Well, we'll get into that. And so I want to begin our conversation with surviving the last 3.5 years or so. How did you
Okay.
get through the how did you get through the pandemic, and how did it change you?
Yeah. I Getting through it was complicated. So I have 4 kids,
Yeah.
and when COVID hit, my youngest was 3, and then the rest were up through school, elementary school, middle school. And it was an interesting time. We have 6 people in a 1,600 square foot house, and we were all on top of each other.
Uh-huh.
But I would say the blessing of that was that no one was, we weren't bored, and we had a bit of a group together, right? Like when everyone was so isolated, my kids had each other to play with. And that was, I think in the end, that was really helpful, even though it felt really overwhelming. Um, and I think the other thing that really shifted through that, I mean, so clearly there was a lot of developmental stuff that happened with my kids through that period, and impacts that we are still kind of dealing with in some ways, as was true of all children at that time. But I think the other thing that COVID really did was kind of start to shift my way and shift my work in ways that I didn't anticipate at the time. So I just had a private practice in therapy at that point. I had also been doing some executive coaching, but that wasn't a huge piece of it. And my therapy practice completely ballooned, as you can imagine, right? I mean, the need was just so great. Every person that I had worked with ever, it felt like, came back for more support, and I really, really wanted to provide that support. Um, and I had been toying with the idea of growing my practice as my youngest got into kindergarten, but I kind of did that a little bit earlier because I really wanted to be able to help all of the people that were reaching out to me. Um, so work kind of got bigger, and I was supporting my kids at home around kind of online school. And I started doing more of the executive coaching piece as well. And coming out of COVID on the other side was when I really started to see the impacts of that on working parents as a whole, certainly on myself. But watching how companies navigated coming out of that and what they were asking parents to do and what parents had been through and that kind of entire experience. That's when I started getting into consulting with companies as well around how to better support working parents, because people, especially people that had become parents during COVID, who had set up their lives around some flexibility of, returning to work in the office or not, were all of a sudden getting hit with, now you have to be back in, and their schedules weren't set up for that, and it was really a strain. And I think for a lot of them it felt like, well, I was actually quite productive at home, right? Like this was working okay for us. Why are we needed to go back just to have more Zoom meetings with people that are in other offices or what have you? And so it kind of, that's why I ended up adding that piece. And so clearly that was an unexpected route for me that I took because of COVID.
Yeah. I would imagine, I know personally my son's on the spectrum and all of our meetings went to virtual, but I actually liked it because there's such an anticipation, there's such a drive, there all of those variables that can potentially cause anxiety just kind of went away and you still had your visit. I mean, and it doesn't replace the in person, but I think there's a lot of visits that can actually just be done through virtual and it just helps everybody out.
Completely, completely. And I have a kiddo on the spectrum too, so I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
But also because my population that I work with is mostly mothers and new mothers, it made it so much more accessible.
Yeah.
I mean, I had always welcomed them bringing babies to the office, and certainly had, people do sessions bouncing their baby or changing diapers on my office floor, and I didn't care.
Yeah.
But for them to be able to say, my baby's in the crib in the other room, or I just don't have to schlep my baby anywhere to be able to get the support that I need, was huge.
Yeah.
And there's certain areas of the state, and certainly in the whole country, where there's just less providers, right? So all of a sudden people in perhaps Western Massachusetts who were looking for someone that was really specialized in perinatal mental health could get a provider without having to travel such a huge distance.
Yeah. So let's get to the essence of what you do on a daily basis. There's several things that are a part of your world. So I'm going to put you in front of a bunch of third graders. It's career day, and a kid says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer that child?
Well, I feel like I can cheat because I have a second grader,
Sure.
and they know me as a feelings doctor, right? So they
Yeah.
know me as someone that talks to people about their feelings a lot, and that I also sometimes talk to people about how to do their jobs. That's how my kids think of it.
Sure.
I think the added piece I would say is that essentially in all of my hats, I'm helping working parents feel like they're doing better at being a parent and at their jobs.
Yeah.
That's kind of that's the connection across all of the different hats that I do wear.
So, what did you want to be when you were in the 3rd grade?
I was gonna be a doctor.
Okay.
My parents, both of my parents were doctors, and which was pretty rare because my mom was, she graduated medical school in 1969. She was one of 10 women in a class of 300. So I thought she was cool. I liked science. I liked helping people, and those were the two closest role models I had. And I actually pursued that until I got into medical school, and then said, wait a minute, this might not be my dream. Maybe this is coming from somewhere else. And I ended up going into clinical psychology instead.
So, let's go back to growing up. What were the fundamental seeds that were planted into you to wanna get into psychology, to wanna help people, to ultimately get to this place that you're at in life?
So the funny thing is, I didn't know that psychology even like existed as a field as a kid. I wouldn't see my parents were physicians. They were not like uh, emotionally coaching type folks. And I remember hearing about like the idea of therapy in high school, and I thought, who would ever want to do that? Don't you just sit around and listen to people's problems all day? Like, it just sounded so unappealing. But I really, I was always very curious about people. I was a super analytical thinker,
Mhm.
and I liked to teach, and I think I liked to connect. And my teachers, I would get in trouble for talking in school, mostly because I wanted to help my classmates learn the material who were struggling. um, and my teachers always kind of said, well, Anne's a natural leader. Like, that's what they would say to my parents, and my parents would always be like, I don't know where that comes from, because that doesn't fit either of our personalities. So I think those were kind of the pieces that eventually came together. And when I originally went into clinical psychology, it wasn't because I thought I would be a therapist. It was the research element. I thought maybe I wanted to teach. I was kind of thinking I'd go be a professor. And I enjoyed teaching, but once I started doing the clinical work, I just fell in love with the chance to just that one-on-one connection, getting to hear people's stories. It very much isn't just listening to people's problems all day. So once I was actually doing it and got exposed to it, it kind of was like, this is exactly what I want to be doing.
So, obviously, you have to be anonymous, but what has been one of the best client success stories that you've been involved with?
Well, I think, kind of creating an amalgams of folks, but I think some of my favorite work is, essentially when clients realize they're okay as who they are, right? That
Mhm.
process of recognizing, like, kind of slowly, when I peel back the layers of everybody else's expectations of me, and kind of tune into what do I want and who am I, and then start to feel okay with whoever that is. Like,
Yeah.
that to me is the ultimate goal, almost no matter what problem someone walks in with.
Well, I hear that a lot with people that, even in therapy settings, the number one thing that comes out is that people are too hard on themselves,
Yeah.
you know? And
Yeah.
once they get rid of that and see themselves in a better light, then everything changes.
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. I think we are all our own worst critics for the most part. And I can even, I can put myself in that category, right? I mean, it was especially becoming a parent, and having a kid on the spectrum and not knowing it at the time. He wasn't diagnosed until later. I spent a lot of years thinking, man, I just must be like the worst mom in the world, right? That, like, this is not going how it is going for everybody else. And I ended up getting my own therapist at the time and got some support around it, and recognizing, like, no, hey, like, there's some other things at play here. This is not a you problem.
Yeah.
And so it is that space of kind of silencing that inner critic and externalizing it a bit and recognizing like no, no, we actually you're doing just fine.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Who's been a hero for you in your life? Who's been an inspiration?
I mean, I think lots of people. As I mentioned in the beginning, I look back at my own mom's career and life, and I'm pretty impressed. Not only was she a woman doctor at a time where that like just wasn't a thing, basically. She also was an amputee, so she was disabled and like never kind of let that get in her way. So I've always been really impressed. By her journey, really, even though, she's not famous. She's not a rocket scientist, but I've always been really impressed with everything that she's been able to accomplish in her life.
So speaking of big inspirations that exist on the planet, if you can meet one person alive today and spend a little time with them, who would it be?
I was I think in part because it would be fun. I would love to meet like some of the famous women comedians like Amy Poehler or Tina Fey because I think
Yeah,
I would learn so much from them and I think I would laugh the entire time, right? Like it
yeah.
just wouldn't stop being fun. Um, while also being serious and kind of touching and heartfelt and kind of hearing about their journeys.
Yeah. So you clearly are giving a lot of yourself to clients because you need to help them through, but you obviously have you yourself that you have to take care of and evolve as well. How do you balance that out? What's your inspiration every day to wake up and to be holistic, to help the client, to take care of yourself? What's that drive?
Well, I think for me, part of it is that I really enjoy what I do, and I have a lot of variety, right? So, like some people carve out their variety in a day to day basis. I could do four different things over the course of a day, right? Like I have this, and I have a therapy patient today, and I have a coaching call, and so there's a lot of variety, and I'm excited to do all of it. Um, Right. And so that is a part of it. It's not, I have a lot of balls in the air, but most of them aren't balls that I'm kind of just dreading. um, but I would say on top of that, I'm pretty boundaried about my time. I make sure I get my sleep every night. I make sure I get my workout in every day. Um, I do mindfulness exercise every day, right? Like I get in some of those self care things as well. So it's a little bit of a mixture of I like the things I'm doing, and I make sure to carve out the time that's for me. That's going to kind of keep me mentally, physically capable of doing all the things I need to do.
So the one thing about your profession is, we heard all this talk of essential workers during the pandemic. But it seems like now the psychology and the mental health of this country is essential work because everybody's coming out of the PTSD and they're all dealing with it. What's your beat right now as we enter a new year and we've kind of, I know there's been variants on COVID, but the whole like lockdown and all of that's been gone for a little while. How do you see the mental stability of people now? Is it getting better? Are we all still kind of in zombie land trying to figure our way out? How do you see this kind of working right now?
I think it's getting better. And I think part of that is, there's more and more awareness of mental health as part of our lives,
Yeah.
right? And as part of our existence, and a thing that people struggle with sometimes. There's more help available. There's more willingness to seek help. I mean, I used to work a lot with a lot of college students, and I still do occasionally. And I love my younger students. I'll get people who reach out and say, I don't actually have anything I'm struggling with. I'm supposed to have a therapist, right? Everybody has a therapist that they just go see and talk to. And I love it because in an ideal world, yes, that's exactly how it should be. That you don't necessarily have to wait till you're just so depressed you can't get out of bed or so anxious that you feel like you're going to crawl out of your skin at the idea of going to work, right? Like the ideal would be that you have support kind of in an ongoing way as things come up. And so I think ideally, hope maybe I'm being optimistic, right? That culturally we are moving to a place where mental health is part of the conversation and is kind of how we think about self-care in general.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, for sure. So, of all of the things that you've done and accomplished and become at this point, what are you the proudest of?
Honestly, I think it's the thing I'm proudest of is trying to set a good example for my kids of like finding things that you enjoy doing and making that a part of your life, and really making sure to carve out kind of intentional time with them.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So speaking of youth, let's say we have a dream, you have a dream tonight and you run into the 20-year-old version of you. You can give that young version of you a piece of advice based on the wisdom you've gained in your life so far. What advice would you dispense on your young version of you?
my 20 something, I would totally say just something along the lines of let go, like just tolerate the unknown and give into some serendipity because essentially you have no idea what you're in for in
Yeah.
a good way. In a
Yeah.
good way, right? I
Yeah.
was a people pleasing perfectionist at that age, and really kind of trying to get everything just right and planned. And I think I could have saved myself a fair amount of heartache had I let go a little bit earlier.
For sure. So everyone has a perception of you. You have all these different roles that you play, family, friends, clients, but ultimately you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I would say I am like a thinker, right? Like I'm always thinking about something. How can I do this differently, this better? How can I help this person? How can I, reading books, kind of just consuming information like voraciously and taking it all in. And I think that's the piece that it kind of happens behind the scenes, right? Like that's the stuff I'm doing to make me better at my job, to make me better as a parent, to try to like think about how are my kids approaching this? What can I do differently? So that's kind of the quiet noise behind the scenes, not in an anxious way, but just in a curious, always wanting to learn
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. So if anyone out there wants to learn more about you, hire you, reach out, anything about your world, where's the best place to go?
The best place to start is my website, which is drannewelsh.com. And they can find stuff there about my therapy practice, about my executive coaching. I have a group coaching program for working mothers, and about my consulting and media and speaking work too.
Excellent. And thank you. I appreciate your story, appreciate your time. Best of luck with everything.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.